Well, hello, welcome to today's Lunchtime Nugget. Thank you for joining, whether it be now, live, or later. Thank you for being a part of it and watching. Today, I want to talk about an overflow, really, of what I'm thinking through and studying. I'm going to be teaching next week to teenagers, and I have been thinking about this text right here. A few years ago, I spoke at a teen activity Hoosier Hills Baptist Camp, and I spoke on this subject. So I'm going back and reworking this and thinking through it for next week, and I'm really excited about it. I'm pumped about it. And here's what it is. I want you to think about this. Daniel chapter number 1. Now let's set the scene. Daniel's been taken from his home, taken from his family, and he is among the rest of these young Israelites that were taken, these Jews. And they're basically slaves, but they're being trained. And they got set before him some meat. Now, Daniel didn't want this meat. The Jews weren't to eat this meat. But everybody else was just chowing down on it. So he had to make a decision. And it says this in verse number 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Now, it's a little different culture than we are in today. I mean, you set a ribeye in front of me, and I'm going to hammer that ribeye. And so it's a little different culture, but you got to understand, in his culture, in the day and age he lived, he believed in God. It was not that he just believed. They were not to have that meat. And so he didn't want that because he loved his God, but that's what they set in front of him. But it said that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. So this first C, if you saw the letter, what's it called? Inscription? No, you saw the title, whatever. The first C I call the committed heart. You see, Daniel had a committed heart. He had committed that he was not going to defile himself. Now that commitment, I believe, was made before he ever got captured. He was committed to God. He loved God. He loved God with all of his heart. So he was absolutely committed to God. And so he had a committed heart. But then secondly, notice it didn't just start with a commitment. Now, a lot of things I'm going to say to those teenagers, but for the sake of our lunchtime nugget today, he had a committed heart. No doubt about that. But then the second C is this. Because a lot of people just stay at committed. Well, I'm committed to God, but they don't back it up with anything. You know, if you're committed to God, it's going to lead to the second thing, because the second C was this, a courageous action. Because it says in the second part of that verse that it says, therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So here he is, he's captured. They lay before him a nice spread of meat, but he knows it goes against what he's been taught. And he goes against his God. And so he makes a courageous action. It was more than just a committed heart, but now he takes the courageous action, and he says, he goes to the eunuch who could probably have him killed. And he says, can I get something else to eat? Now that's what my kids say every single evening when we set them down to dinner, and it's pretty courageous because I may have their heads chopped. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. But it's a pretty courageous thing in this situation because he was captured. He could have been killed, but he wanted to honor God. He was committed to God, and you could see that in his courageous action. It was an action of faith. Now, what happened next? Because what happened next is what is going to lead me to teach this whole thing. When he had a committed heart and he had a courageous request or action, watch the next verse, verse 9, as it starts to rain. Verse 9 says this, now God brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of eunuchs. Do you see? Here's what I love about this. When you and I have a committed heart and you and I have courageous action, that's all we can do. That's as far as we can go. But then God moves in. Because when God sees a committed heart and he sees our courageous action in faith, it moves God to do what we can't do. And now God's sovereign and providential hand moves in, and he worked in the heart of that eunuch and gave Daniel favor. You see, what I love about this is I can't do the impossible. Think about this. David couldn't beat Goliath. but he had a committed heart. He made a courageous action, and God stepped in. You see, there's principles like this throughout the Bible. And so I've realized in my life, and what I'm going to be teaching these teenagers in a lot more depth next week, is that, and I may even teach it on the podcast sometime because I really love this truth. You and I need to have the courageous heart. And I'm going to talk about how do we get that. We need to have the committed heart, courageous actions. And then watch as God moves on our behalf. I love that principle. I think it's a great principle seen in Daniel chapter number 1. And I believe it's seen with David. There's others. List them in the comments if you want. Give me some of your thoughts. Where are some other C plus C equals God moving? Where do we see that? Committed heart, courageous action of faith, and then we see God move. There's a lot of them. I've only named 2. Go ahead and put in the comments if you want some more. But I believe that is a principle that we see so often, and God wants to move on our behalf. But so often we're not committed. And we think we're doing some things, but we don't have a committed heart, so we don't see God move. Or we have a committed heart. We say, I'm committed to this, but we don't ever move. Don't ever take any actions. We just say it with our lips, and we don't see it. But you put a committed heart along with courageous actions, you get to see God move. So I'm working over that. I'm mulling over that in my head. I just gave you guys a rough copy of that. And I'm putting some things on paper and taking a message I've done before and putting it all together, and hope to be encouraged with some teens. But it was a challenge to me, and so it's an overflow of these lunchtime nuggets, and I wanted to share that with you as well. So thank you for being a part of it. Have a good rest of the day. It's starting to rain on me. I'm going to do a little reading here for the last bit of my lunch, and then I'm going to get back at it. So have a good day.